The thing about my uncle is that he always waited for an audience before he said anything worth remembering. Christmas Eve dinner, 3 years ago. His house in Mississauga, the one with the double garage and the heated driveway he mentioned at every family gathering between November and April. I showed up straight from my shift at No Frills, still wearing my work vest over my sweater because I had left my coat in my car, and it was -12 outside, and I was not walking back through the slush to get it. My hair smelled like the deli counter. I knew it. I sat down at the far end of the long table next to my mother, and told myself it didn't matter. My uncle noticed the vest about 30 seconds after I sat down. He was standing at the head of the table with a glass of red wine, talking to 2 of my cousins about a condo project he was breaking ground on in Hamilton. He paused mid-sentence, looked at me, and smiled the way people smile when they have just thought of something they find genuinely funny. "Still at the grocery store?" he said. Not mean, exactly, more like curious, the way someone might ask if you still had that old car you couldn't get rid of. I said yes. He turned to the rest of the table, my aunt, my cousins, my mother, my brother who was already working for him as a project coordinator, and lifted his glass slightly. "I put that girl through hockey registration, tutoring, the whole thing. She ends up scanning produce at No Frills." He laughed and looked back at me. "I'm kidding, Nina. Someone has to keep the shelves stocked." The table laughed. My mother laughed. My brother looked at his plate. I smiled, picked up my fork, and said nothing. What nobody at that table knew was that I had written my final CPA examination 11 days earlier. I had been studying for 3 years. Every evening after my shift, I came home, made instant noodles or reheated whatever I had packed from the night before, and opened my study materials on the kitchen table, while my roommate watched television in the next room. Saturdays I took the GO train into Toronto, and sat in the library on King Street for 6 or 7 hours at a stretch. Sundays I worked through practice examinations until my eyes went dry, and the words on the page stopped resolving properly. I told almost no one because I had told someone once. An old friend from high school, and she had said very kindly, that seemed like a lot of work, and was I sure that was realistic for me. I had decided after that conversation to let the results do the talking. My uncle owned a mid-sized residential construction company that had been building in the GTA for over 30 years. His name appeared on signage outside developments in Mississauga and Hamilton, and people in the family said it with a particular satisfaction, the way you say the name of something solid. My brother had been with him 4 years, coordinating project timelines and managing relationships with subcontractors. At every Sunday dinner, my mother introduced my brother by his job title. She introduced me by saying I was still figuring things out, which was her way of being kind about something she genuinely did not understand. I stopped correcting her. The people who decide what you are before they have listened tend to be the last ones to update their opinion. And the easiest way to carry that particular weight is to set it down and stop looking back at it. 6 weeks after I wrote my final exam, the results arrived at 7:42 in the morning, while I was standing in the parking lot of No Frills waiting for the store manager to unlock the front door. I read the email 3 times before I believed it. I passed. I called my mother to tell her. She said that was wonderful and asked if I was still coming for dinner on Sunday. She did not ask what a CPA designation meant for my future or what it had cost me to get there. I ate my lunch alone that day on a bench behind the loading dock, watching delivery trucks come and go, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not pride exactly, more like the particular quiet that comes after something long has finally finished. A colleague from my evening exam prep course had been working at a boutique financial advisory firm in downtown Toronto. Her name was Sasha, and she had been the kind of study partner who color-coded her notes in 3 separate pens and texted at midnight when she found errors in the practice materials. She sent me a message the week after my results came in. The firm needed a junior financial analyst. The senior partner was expanding the due diligence practice and wanted someone who could read a set of financial statements and understand what they were actually saying versus what they were trying to present. The pay was considerably more than what I was making at No Frills. She thought I should apply. I applied. I interviewed twice. 3 weeks later, I gave notice, shook my supervisor's hand, and took the GO train into Toronto for the last time as someone going to a library rather than to work. I did not tell my family. This might seem strange, but I had watched what happened when my brother got his position with my uncle. The announcement at Sunday dinner. The congratulations that lasted 3 weeks. The The questions about his title and salary and how the office looked. My mother printing out a page from the company website to show her friends at church. There was nothing wrong with any of that. I simply did not want it. I wanted to walk into my new office without anyone's expectations already in the room. My mother thought I was still at no frills. When anyone asked, she said I was doing well at the grocery store, and I let her because correcting it would have required a conversation I was not ready to have and she was not ready to hear. 10 months after I started at the firm, a new file came in from one of our banking partners. TD Bank's commercial lending division had engaged us to conduct independent due diligence on a construction bridge loan application. The borrower was a residential developer based in Mississauga. Sasha handed me the folder on a Tuesday morning with a coffee and told me I was lead analyst on the file. The loan amount was $9.8 million. Bridge financing to complete 2 stalled condo projects in Hamilton while the company awaited buyer deposit releases from a building it had already sold. I opened the folder at my desk. I saw the company name. I sat very still for a moment. Then I read it again. The name of the applicant was my uncle's company. I set the folder down. I looked out the window at the gray February sky above the financials district. I thought about Christmas Eve. I thought about the word produce, and the way my uncle had said it, and the way the table had laughed. Then I thought about what my job actually required of me, which was to review numbers without sentiment, and I picked the folder back up and kept reading. The financial statements told a more complicated story than the one my uncle told at family dinners. Revenue was strong. The company had a solid backlog and a well-established reputation in the region, but the cash position had become dangerously thin. 2 projects had gone significantly over budget because material costs had increased sharply over the previous 18 months, a problem that had hit the whole construction industry in southern Ontario. Several subcontractors were carrying invoices that were 60 and 90 days past due. The Hamilton developments were fundamentally sound projects in a growing market, but the urgency of the bridge financing request suggested the company had been trying to manage the shortfall internally for longer than the application acknowledged. I worked through the files carefully over the following days. I pulled permit records and municipal approvals, reviewed the subcontractor agreements, and modeled 3 different cash flow scenarios based on different assumptions about completion timelines and sales velocity. I cross-referenced the company's current debt structure against its asset base and compared the project margins against industry benchmarks for residential development in the Hamilton corridor. As I worked, I began recognizing details I knew from outside the office. A business name on a subcontractor list belonged to a man my uncle had mentioned for years. Someone who had been with the company since it had fewer than 10 employees. A line in the payroll records showed names I recognized from company barbecues in the summers when I was a teenager. Men who had been working in this trade their whole adult lives. Men who had once lifted me up to see the framing of a building going up in Oakville when I was 7 years old, because I asked what was happening behind the hoarding. The file stopped feeling abstract somewhere around the 3rd day. I wrote a note to myself at the top of my working document. Separate the analysis from what you know about the people involved. I kept it there for the rest of the review. The management presentation was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in our boardroom. My uncle walked in looking the way he always looked at the head of any table, prepared, at ease, already reading the room. He greeted our senior partner by first name and made a comment about the drive from Mississauga in February that landed reasonably well. He had the particular confidence of someone who had been selling himself successfully for a long time and had long since stopped being aware that he was doing it. He did not look toward the chairs along the side wall where the analysts were seated. I sat with my notes and my laptop, and I did not make any move to identify myself. 20 minutes into the presentation, our senior partner turned to me. "Nina," he said, "would you walk us through your cash flow analysis and the sensitivity model on the Hamilton projects?" My uncle looked up from the documents in front of him. The moment he registered who I was, something shifted in his face. Not embarrassment. Not immediately. More like the expression of someone who has just realized they are standing in a room where the geography is slightly different from what they remembered. He looked at me for a second and a half. Then he looked down at his documents again. I turned to the screen and began walking through the numbers. By the following week, the news had somehow moved through the family. I did not know who had said what to whom, but my phone started lighting up in ways it hadn't before. My aunt called to say she was so proud of me. Wasn't this a funny coincidence? Family supporting family. And by the way, how was everything looking? I told her I could not discuss active files outside the office. She said she understood completely, and asked again 30 seconds later in different words. 2 cousins sent texts. One of them wrote a string of heart emojis followed by the single word anything, and I did not answer that one at all. My mother called 3 times in 4 days. She had been told something, though clearly not everything, because she referred to my finance job for the first time, without prompting and without asking me what it actually involved. Each call circled back to the same question in a slightly different form. The hardest call came from my brother. He phoned on a Wednesday evening while I was eating reheated soup at my kitchen table with files spread around me. He wasn't trying to manipulate me. He sounded the way people sound when they have been worried about something longer than they have admitted, even to themselves. A few of the guys on the long-term crew have been quietly looking around, he said, not saying anything, but you can tell. Rafi hasn't said a word to anyone, but I can see it on him. He's got 3 kids. Been with the company since before I started high school. These aren't just employees, Nina. They built something real there. I knew who Rafi was. I had eaten his wife's food at a company holiday party years ago. I had watched him and my uncle argue good-naturedly over a barbecue about how to properly grill halloumi while their kids ran around the backyard. I told my brother the same thing I had told everyone else, that I could not discuss the file, that decisions at this scale involved multiple reviewers, multiple levels of approval, that no single analyst determined the outcome. He said he understood. Then, quietly, he said, I just don't want to watch people lose something they spent 20 years building because the paperwork went the wrong way. I told him I had to go. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after the call ended without picking up any of the files. Late that same week, Sasha and I were the last ones left in the office. She closed the conference room door and put 2 folders on the table. One contained my uncle's file. The other was a different residential developer, a younger firm, cleaner balance sheet, lower risk profile, applying for financing in a similar range. She told me to look at both, without thinking about the names on the cover, and tell her what I found. I spent nearly an hour going through them side by side. The other company was safer, newer, leaner, with a more conservative project pipeline and no legacy debt complications. The numbers were simpler to defend. My uncle's company was riskier in the short term, but it was also substantially larger, employed far more people across a network of long-standing subcontractor relationships, and had a track record in the Hamilton and Mississauga markets that the newer firm could not replicate. The fundamental problem was not the business. It was a pattern of financial decision-making that had prioritized growth over liquidity for too many consecutive cycles. And nobody had ever required the company to stop and reckon with that. I told Sasha what I found. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, So what is the actual problem? I thought about it carefully. The company can recover, I said, but only if it starts being run differently than it has been. The revenue is there, the client relationships are there. The problem is that the decisions that created this situation haven't been examined yet. She nodded. Then the recommendation has to say that clearly. I drove home that night on the QEW and passed through Hamilton just after dark. The construction cranes along the escarpment were lit against the sky. I thought about Rafi and his family. I thought about my uncle at Christmas Eve dinner, glass raised, finding exactly the right words to make a table full of people laugh. I thought about what it meant to be the person holding a file that contained everything someone had spent 30 years building, distilled into columns of figures and ratio calculations on a screen. I did not feel powerful. I felt like I had been handed something heavy and was responsible for not dropping it. The credit committee met on a Monday morning. I was not a voting member. I was there to present findings, answer questions clearly, and stay out of the way of a process that had its own logic and its own rigor. 7 people sat around the table. I sat against the wall with my laptop and my folder and I waited. The discussion ran for close to 2 hours. One committee member argued that the company's asset base, its track record, and its market position provided sufficient security for the loan. Another raised concerns about cash reserves and what she described as a consistent pattern of projections that had not met completion timelines. Both arguments were grounded in the same set of facts. That was what made it a genuine decision, rather than an obvious one. Halfway through the session, the committee chair turned toward me. "You conducted the operational review," she said. "Based on everything you have seen, do you believe this company has a viable path to recovery if the financing goes through?" The room was completely quiet. I had been thinking about how to answer this question for 10 days. "Yes," I said. "But only if the company becomes a different company than the one that created this situation." I explained that the business still had experienced people, valuable assets, and a genuine market position. The problem was not the work itself. It was the financial discipline, or the absence of it, behind every major decision made over the previous several years. If the loan was approved without conditions attached, it would solve a cash problem for 6 months and recreate the same problem at a larger scale. If it was approved with structured oversight and quarterly reporting requirements, there was a real recovery case. I laid out what those conditions would need to include: independent review of project budgets above a set threshold, restrictions on new contract commitments until the existing projects cleared, executive expense controls, and direct reporting to the bank's commercial team every quarter. When I finished, nobody spoke for a moment. The chair thanked me. The analysts were asked to wait in the hallway. I sat on a bench outside the conference room for nearly an hour. Sasha brought me a coffee without being asked and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. When the door opened, the senior partner came out and found me before he spoke to anyone else. "Approved," he said quietly, "with all of your conditions. Your uncle is not going to like the conditions." My uncle called 2 days later. We met at a Tim Hortons near his office. His suggestion, which surprised me a little. I had expected somewhere with a wine list. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a large double-double, and he looked older than I remembered. Not worn down exactly. Just more present, the way people look when they have stopped spending energy on a version of themselves that no longer applies. He slid the loan agreement across the table and tapped the conditions section on the first page. "They don't trust me," he said. I looked at the document for a moment before I answered. "They trust the company," I said. "They're not confident yet that the company will make the decisions it should have been making all along." He was quiet. He looked at the table. Then he said, "I kept thinking the next project would balance out the last one. For about 8 years I kept thinking that." It wasn't a defense. It was just a true thing said plainly, in the way people sometimes say true things when they have finally run out of ways to avoid them. I told him the conditions were not designed to humiliate him. They were designed to give the company a structure that could hold while it found its footing again. He nodded slowly. He did not apologize for Christmas Eve. I had not expected him to. Some things do not arrive as apologies. I had been starting to understand that. Before I left, he looked at the table and said, "I never asked you what you were working toward." He paused. "All those years and I never once asked." I did not have an answer for that, but I thought about it on the GO train home, and I kept thinking about it for weeks after. The company accepted every condition without negotiating a single one. Over the months that followed, the Hamilton projects moved forward. Subcontractor invoices were paid down. The cash position slowly improved. My brother sent me a text one afternoon that said simply, "Things are better," and I knew exactly what he meant without needing more detail. My aunt and I exchanged pleasantries at Easter. My cousins texted on my birthday. My uncle and I did not speak again for several months, and neither of us seemed to feel the absence as a wound. My mother, for the first time, began telling people I worked in finance. She was not entirely certain what that meant in practice, but she said it with a confidence that made me smile every time I overheard it. I was promoted to senior analyst in the autumn. I updated my voicemail and told Sasha, and that was the extent of the announcement. The following spring, the Hamilton Board of Trade held a business reception. My firm had a table, and I was expected to attend. I usually left these events after 40 minutes and went home. My uncle was listed as one of 4 panelists on a session about residential development and economic recovery in the city. I did not know he was speaking until I saw the program. I stood in the lobby for 30 seconds, considering whether to leave before it started. Then I thought that was foolish, and I found a chair near the back of the room. He was good on the panel. Clear and specific, not overselling. He talked about cash flow the way someone talks about it when it has genuinely frightened them, and the audience responded to that quality in his answers. The polished version of him and the honest version of him were starting to look like the same person, which had not always been the case. At the end, a moderator opened the floor for questions. Someone asked what the most important lesson from the past couple of years had been. The other panelists gave composed answers about resilience and the importance of professional relationships. My uncle paused before he answered. He looked at the table for a moment. Honestly, he said, I spent most of my career believing that confidence and hard work were enough to hold everything together. And I was wrong. He paused again. The person who understood what was actually happening with my business, better than I did, better than anyone I had paid to advise me, was someone I had never taken seriously. Someone I should have been paying attention to long before I needed her to help save what I had built. He did not look toward the back of the room. He did not know I was there. The audience nodded and the moderator moved on. I stayed in my seat until the room was mostly empty. I did not want to cross the floor and speak to him in that moment. Not because I was still carrying anything from Christmas Eve. Because what he had said did not need a response from me. He had said it because it was true. In a room full of people who did not know the story, with nothing to gain from it. That was a different man than the one who had lifted a wine glass and waited for the table to laugh. I walked out through the lobby and stood on the sidewalk in the April air. Hamilton at that hour smells like the lake if the wind is right. A few weeks later I stopped at the No Frills on Barton Street on my way back from a site visit. I needed milk, and the parking was easy. I was standing in the produce section when my old supervisor came around the corner with a pricing gun and recognized me right away. She was exactly the same as she had always been. Practical, unhurried, the kind of person who runs a store well by doing the same thing all day without needing anyone to notice. Look at you, she said. Nice coat. I laughed. She asked how I was doing and I told her briefly and honestly. She nodded the way she nodded when a delivery came in on time. No ceremony, just satisfaction. You always had the brain for the numbers, she said, and went back to her work. I paid at the self-checkout because the line was shorter, which is a small betrayal I register every time. Standing in the parking lot with my grocery bag, watching people move in and out through the sliding doors, I thought about what that store had actually given me, not the job, the practice, standing still while someone talked down to you without letting it change how you did your work. Showing up on time in bad weather and doing the task in front of you without commentary. Reading a room in 10 seconds. Staying steady when the environment was not. Being patient when patience was the only option that led anywhere worth going. My uncle had laughed at a vest and a name tag, and the smell of the deli section 2 days before Christmas. He had not understood what wearing it was teaching me. And in the end, what I had learned in that store turned out to be the thing he needed most. Not the designation, not the financial models, not the professional vocabulary of risk and return. The steadiness, the patience, the ability to sit across from someone who had once made a table laugh at my expense and tell him the honest truth about his own numbers without flinching, without settling a score, and without needing him to know it had cost me anything at all. That part did not come from the office. And it was the only part that mattered when it counted.